I think we can be starting. This is 10 a.m. now here in Colombia. I don't know exactly the time in all the places, but we are just the time for beginning the session. Uh, First of all, I would like to thank you, all our presenters here, and give you the welcome to this virtual day of identity federations. Um, just a quick introduction. We have presentations from different parts of the world and different organizations. We have people from Terena. We have people from the University of Catania, from the Peaceful Supercomputing Center. We have people from National Supercomputer Center for Applications, and from our national networks, REUNA and RNAP. Our presenters will be talking to us about their experience in identity federations and how are they important for their customers and their communities. And without any more introduction, I will hope that this day is very useful for all of us, and that our entrance can be implemented in federation in these areas as soon as possible. We believe in the high importance of this area for customers.
Eu não consigo ver aqui, não?
I will give the word to Alejandro Stock from the University of Merida, who will be providing the introduction of our presenters and will be starting with the program. Thank you.
Hola a todos. Voy a dar una breve introducción en español. For our English speakers, I will speak shortly in Spanish. Hoy vamos a abordar el tema de federaciones de identidad y la facilidad de acceso a servicios académicos, y vamos a mirarlo desde diferentes partes del mundo. La idea es que veamos cómo se está llevando la gestión de identidad, ya que es un proceso complejo y que tenemos muchos recursos y servicios disponibles en nuestras universidades y queremos hacerlo de manera segura y fácil de acceder a nuestros usuarios. La idea de las charlas de hoy es que veamos otras experiencias en regiones como Norteamérica, Europa, y podamos implementarlas en Latinoamérica. Vamos a comenzar con el viejo continente, con el Reino Unido, con Italia. Luego veremos la experiencia de los Estados Unidos y finalmente cerraremos con la experiencia de Latinoamérica, con el proyecto El CIRA y la RNP en Brasil, para ver cómo estamos montando federaciones en Latinoamérica y poniéndonos al día con esta facilidad para acceder a recursos académicos de manera sencilla y segura para todas nuestras comunidades de usuarios. Estamos a la orden para preguntas y voy a dejarlos con David Kelsey del Reino Unido, quien nos va a hablar sobre la investigación en comunidades de federación y gestión de acceso a identidades del Reino Unido. David, you have the words now. You can start your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Alejandra, for that introduction. So can I just check you are hearing me okay? This is fine? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, fine. So I will. Greetings from everybody from England. It is now 4:05 in the afternoon here at Rutherford Appleton Lab in the UK, just to set the timetable. So I'm going to be talking about some work that's been going on in Europe about federated identity management, particularly looking at it from the point of view of research communities. So if I could have slide 2, please. So, a few words of introduction about who I am. My day job here at Rutherford Appleton Lab is I'm head of the Particle Physics Computing Group. So I'm involved in lots of the WLCG and grid computing for particle physics for the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, etc. But specifically over the last 10 years, I've been working in many activities to do with grid security, today in EGI, in WLCG, and in my UK project, GridPP. I'm involved with both policy development and security operations, but also I've been very interested in working and active in identity federations. So the International Grid Trust Federation is something that's I actually started myself 12 years ago. This grew into EU Grid PMA and TAG PMA, where I'm still an active member representing WLCG as a relying party, as a consumer of the identities there. But then this FIM4R activity, which I'm going to be telling you about, I'm one of the representatives. There are 2 or 3 of us on that activity from the particle physics community from WLCG. So next slide. So what I'm going to tell you about is what is this FIM4R? What is the activity? How did it come about? Where are we? Why do we want to federate? Some words on the status and plans. There's a fair number of slides here, which I won't necessarily go through in great detail because we don't have that much time, but they're there for completeness, for studying afterwards if the slides can be made available to people. Looking at where we are with working with the identity federation providers, with RefEds, Edugain, Géant, etc., and some lessons learned. So next slide. So FIM4R, the Federated Identity Management for Research Collaborations, was an activity that started about 2 years ago in Europe. There are a number of computing bodies that was led by CERN, by Bob Jones there, and a number of the other communities getting together where they discuss all sorts of international type collaboration issues, computing being one of them. And they realized that they all had this common problem, that it would be nice to actually have better identity management within their research community. So it was agreed that we would start to work together within these various communities in Europe to explore and document our sort of joint vision for federated identity management and what are the requirements so that we could express these clearly to the technology identity providers and describe those issues, because people had hit many issues that make progress difficult. So in terms of the communities involved, this includes many different communities in research. So climate science, earth sciences, the European Space Agency, high energy physics, social sciences and humanities, life sciences, neutron and photon facilities. For example, across Europe, there are 25 neutron and photon facilities, all of whom up until now have had their own identity management systems, and they have a desire to have a combined identity management system that allows users who often use more than one facility to move around and use the same account to log in. We NMR and some others as well, I'm sure, that are joining. And it's by far not a closed club. Anybody is welcome to join. If there is interest from South America, from Latin America, in joining in these activities, it is open. I mean, it's not a closed club by any means. So the next slide, please. So in terms of why do we want to federate, have you gone to the next slide? I don't see it yet. Slide 5. Have I lost the network? No, I see it now. Okay, thank you. It's primarily driven by ease of management and ease of use for the end users. As I said, the photon or neutron facilities, for example, realized that they had a common community. Many of the individual scientists, the researchers, were actually using facilities or do use facilities in many different places. And to actually have to maintain separate identities with each of these facilities was getting difficult to manage. It also naturally separates out authentication and authorization. This is something we've been trying to do in the grid world for a long, long time. To actually, the easiest person to authenticate, to do the identification is your employer, your home institute, your university, your research lab. and then the community themselves, the research community, manage the authorization and the attributes associated with that. This has the benefit then of ease of use for the user because they just have a single account that enables them to access multiple facilities around. And it also makes it much easier for the communities to manage. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So this FIM for Our activity started back in June 2011 with a meeting at CERN. We've been moving around then. We've had now 5 two-day workshops to date. There's a link on this page to the agenda of the most recent meeting. And within that, there are links to the other meetings and to the information that we have discussed at those workshops. We move around to each of the communities. So each of the 5 workshops has been hosted by different research communities. Halfway through this 2 years that we've been working on this, in April 2012, we actually finalized a paper that documents the various use cases from the various research communities, describes the vision, the common requirements and recommendations, and there's a link to this paper in the CERN open document database there. There was also a presentation by Bob Jones at the Terrainer Networking Conference, which I don't have a link to on the slides. The Terrainer Networking Conference in 2012 in Reykjavik in Iceland, where again he went through this paper and went through all of the requirements that we have. If people are interested, that would be a good source of further information because Terrainer actually archives all of the video streams as well, so you can actually watch the talk. Perhaps I should just correct, actually saying Terrainer makes me think I should correct one misunderstanding. There was a point at which I was described on the agenda as working for Terrainer. I have had over the years a lot to do with Terrainer. I've been a member of their technical committee. I actually chaired the program committee for the Terrainer Networking Conference, but I don't actually work for Terrainer, and nor do I represent them. So I'm a particle physicist working at STFC in the UK. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. Now, the next 3 slides I'm going to go through fairly quickly because there's a lot of information here which you can look at afterwards. But the paper that we came up with this wording of the common vision statement, which is that we're aiming, all of the research communities jointly realize we have a lot of the same requirements and that it would be beneficial for us all to move towards this common policy and trust framework for identity management. And I think that's the important words, the fact that it's a framework. We don't necessarily always use all the same technology and implementations, but it's wherever possible to use a common policy and trust framework. And also that we try to use existing stuff. We're not trying to reinvent new federated identity systems. So it's either we will use either those presently in use or available to the communities. And we need, as the communities, to be able to continue to manage our authorization. Means that we need to be able to define attributes related to that authorization for access to the digital resources, to the data, to the CPU resources we have. So if you go on to slide 8, please. So here, I don't have time, I don't think, to go through this in great detail. Slide 8 and slide 9 describe the common requirements that we identified across the various use cases. Things like user friendliness, the fact that we need browser and non-browser federated access. Some of the important ones are levels of assurance, for example. We realized that there are different requirements for the different communities. In the life sciences, biomedical, for example, they have perhaps more stringent requirements for levels of assurance. For other things, other communities, there are lower levels. So we felt that a single one-size-fits-all would not be appropriate, and so that was one of the high priority items we saw as being required. The authorization under community control is also a very important thing. We cannot imagine situations where each of the universities providing the identity services would actually be able to manage the attributes required on behalf of each of the communities for authorization. So we would need to actually keep those under the control of the research collaboration. So if we move on to slide 9. So flexible and scalable IDP attribute release policy is another one. People who had tried to use some of the identity federations in Europe had found that they ended up having to negotiate with each individual IDP, and there were many. The typical requirement is you have a community of, say, 30,000 scientists across Europe, but at each individual university you go to, there's not that many. So in terms of actually negotiating, you don't want to end up negotiating with hundreds of individual universities as how to negotiate the appropriate attribute release, what attributes you need, how to release those to us. And so something needed to be done at the federation level or the interfederation level. Data protection and privacy is an important one in the EU. Clearly, if there are personally identifying information, names and other details about researchers that are subject to the data protection laws, then we need to be able to do that legally. This is one of the reasons why the identity providers are sometimes reluctant to release some of these attributes. Okay, so if we move on to slide 10, please. So one of the things for each of the communities, they have defined one or two pilot projects which they're working on. And this table shows the status of where people were with the pilot projects that were presented at the last workshop in March of this year. Again, I don't want to go through in detail, but you see there's various technologies being used, a lot of them being Shibboleth and SAML based. But working together with Edugain, with RefEds, the requirement for access to non-web applications and the potential that Moonshot as a technology could be interesting for that. So there's a lot of things going on there, and we see this as a very important way of actually taking forward together with our colleagues as to how to actually solve not only the technical issues, but some of the policy issues as well. So if I can move on to page slide 11, the next slide. So what I want to show now are a few slides. So these are from Terrainer. So this is my colleague in Terrainer, Licia Florio, who gave these slides at a RefEds meeting that happened just before the recent Terrainer networking conference in Maastricht in the Netherlands. So this was on Sunday, the 2nd of June. So if we go on to the next slide. So she was specifically addressing, so they had taken our paper that we wrote in FIM4R, looked at the requirements and looked at the use cases, and then tried to identify areas that the RefEds community could deal with. I assume people know what RefEds is, just a few words. So if not, RefEds is this international activity hosted by Terrainer, but it is truly global in scope. They tend to meet 2 or 3 times face-to-face per year. They have lots of communication by email. And it's the body where all of the national NREN-run identity federations talk to each other about interfederation uses. And so one of the things they're considering is what can they do for research collaborations such as those represented by the FIM4R activity. So there it's, Licia said, there's common consensus to work towards increased use of federated identity. However, today there are a number of things which are blocking proper use of this technology, and so we need to work together to look at that. So the next slide. So what they've done is they have taken the FIM4R paper and they've produced their own paper called Addressing eSearch Requirements. There's a link on the bottom of that slide to that paper where they're looking at perhaps correcting some of the misconceptions we had and presenting proposals, a roadmap to actually solve some of these the challenges. So next slide. So this says that the roadmap is a joint work. It's one of the RefEd's work items to identify those key projects within the research community that RefEds or Géant or Edugain jointly can actually try to help address. So, for example, Edugain has been very active in this code of conduct, which is a policy document that's service providers would sign up to within the federations to actually describe best practice as to how they need to manage personal data, such that the identity providers will hopefully be more willing to release things. There's a lot of work going on in the States and in Common, for example, on defining categories of communities. And so there's the research and scholarship category that, again, can categorize service providers such that identity providers may be willing to release attributes. So this is all to do with this scalability and how to actually manage the whole attribute release policy and the scalability issues there. In terms of, on that slide, in terms of funding, so Edugain has some funding, and Géant 3 Plus, the extension of the Géant 3 project, has some dedicated budgets to carry out some work. RefEds has got some funding to actually address some of these issues, and there is a hope that likewise within the e-research communities that we can get funding to actually jointly work together on these issues, because clearly without funding we don't make much progress. So next slide. So they were looking to see where it was they could actually focus. I mean, some of the highest priority ones are the federated access for non-web applications, which is not really in scope for RefEds. They seem to have been concentrating entirely on web-based applications and single sign-on via that sort of technology. There is scope here for the ECP extension of SAML or for Moonshot and stuff, so that may be an area where we can work together with others. One of the problems we had with the research communities is the fact that there's lots of researchers who are homeless, in the sense that they work for a university who has not signed up, even though there is a federation in their country. Their particular university does not offer an IDP, or the individual researchers are not yet covered by that IDP. And there was one of the topics we keep discussing is how to actually deal with these homeless people and guest IDPs. And again, it could be something that we run potentially by the research communities themselves, or it could be something that we expect the federations to do. This whole topic of community managed attribute authorities, it says here some work is happening. There's also some scope. I think in many ways it's actually quite easy. If you look at the grids today, using, for example, VOMS as an authorization technology, you could imagine that the VOMS server then becomes just a service provider in the federation sense, and so the end users would authenticate against that server and then get their attributes from the VOMS server on the basis of that authentication on their federated identity. So that should be work. But one area where there is a lot of activity going on at the moment is this motivating identity providers to release attributes. So there's lots of work on that in the RefEds plan. As I said, looking at defining different types of entities, entity categories, research, scholarship, etc. In terms of level of assurance, COC is this code of conduct that I told you about that Edugain is working in. So there does seem to be good progress in this area. So next slide. So I haven't had time to go through many of the details, and it's probably not appropriate, but I'm of course happy offline to answer questions or put people in touch with other experts to answer specific questions later. But in terms of the lessons we've learned from all of that, this federation is not easy. I mean, I've been aware of all of these federation activities now for many, many years. And I guess if it was easy by now, we would have done it all, right? And so the fact that we haven't yet achieved it is a good sign that it's not easy. And it's not just the technology. I think often the policy and the data protection, legal issues, et cetera, are often more complex and more difficult to sort out than some of the technical issues. But in terms of the requirements for research communities, I mean, the ones that we've highlighted, this attribute release for the identity stuff, often we need identity. I mean, nothing drastic, but just names and email addresses and what have you, and persistent identities, which some identity providers are not willing to release today. The whole issue of scalability of the agreements between service providers and identity providers, the fact that we need levels of assurance, the fact that we need access to non-web applications as well as web-based ones, the IDP for the guests, for the homeless, the fact that we need to merge all these attributes. There are many issues there. And I think what we've actually learned over the last 2 years is that actually working together is the best way of doing it. The RefEds community are now much more willing to talk to us and listen to us because we are many communities working together rather than just one community talking to them. And so that deals with that scalability issue. And so I think we have a chance over the next few years of working together, both from the research communities and with the Federation providers, to actually come up with some solutions which do work. And again, I wish to emphasize that this is not a closed club. I mean, it started in Europe. We're very, very willing to have other people join in, and if people want to, they'd be more than welcome. So if we move on to the final two slides. So next step, slide 17. FIM4R activity continues in Europe. We're going to continue the work on the pilot projects, working together, hopefully with some funding from various sources, with RefEds, with the GÉANT 3+, with Educane, on these agreed roadmap issues. And we have a week of meetings that's now been decided for the end of September, beginning of October. And the idea is then to have that week 3 separate meetings. So one with the VAMPS activity in Terrainer. I'll give you a link on the next slide. This is a virtual organization architecture for middleware, etc., which is again addressing some of that those aspects. So that would meet for the first 2 days. Then there'll be a FIM4R meeting on its own, and then joint with RefEds, and then a RefEds meeting. So more details will become available about that, but that's the week of 30th of September to 3rd of October. And as I say, it's you're very welcome to come if you would like to join in. So you're already looking at the link. So FIM4R, more info is available there. There's the RefEds link for if you want to know more about what's going on there within the Terrainer and RefEds activity, and also this activity called VAMP as well, which to date has only had 1 meeting. Final slide, slide 19, says questions. So I'm happy to take any questions or comments that you may have.
Thank you, David. We're having all the questions at the end of the presentations, so please write them down if you have questions for David, and we will ask them. We will have them all together at the end of the event.
Okay, that's fine. I'm also happy. I was also happy to answer questions by email.
Okay.
Carry on, sorry.
Vamos a realizar la sesión de preguntas al final. Si tienen preguntas para David, por favor, escríbanlas y pásenlas a vía virtual para hacer la realización de preguntas al final. Ahorita vamos a pasar a la presentación de Roberto Barrera de la Universidad de Catania, que nos va a hablar sobre acceso federado a infraestructuras digitales. Roberto, you have the word now.
Thank you very much. Can I have the slides in the main window? My slides in the main window?
Yes, give us a sec.
So I have some animation. So I'll tell somebody to go to next slide, but also to click on each of the slides. So good morning to all our Latin American friends and colleagues, and good afternoon to the European ones. This afternoon I'll try to talk to you about what we are doing to let people access e-infrastructures using federated identities. Next slide. So in my presentation, could you go to, okay. In my presentation, I'll try to give you some introductory concept and some considerations that drove our work in the last couple of years. Then I will try to mention a framework that we are building to build what's called the science gateways. I will go into the definition of the science gateways in the next in the following presentation, and then I'll try to present some of the opportunities which are already available for researchers in Latin America to collaborate with other people in other regions of the world, and then I'll draw some conclusions. Next slide, please. So if we look back at the last 30 years or so, we have steadily evolved from a centralized computing to a decentralized computing. And this has been possible thanks to the combined help of the increase of the power of computing off-the-shelf components and wide area network bandwidth, and the concurrent decrease in the cost of the hardware and the cost of the networks. Next slide, please. So in the last 10 years or so, as David said, lots of projects have been funded by the European Commission and by other funding agencies in the US and Japan to build on top of the intercontinental research networks to create e-infrastructures or cyber infrastructures, like our US colleagues call them, to provide computing and storage for several virtual organizations and to tackle next generation problems in several fields of science. But next slide. If you look at the worldwide e-infrastructure from another point of view, from a middleware point of view, you can easily see that the global infrastructure is completely non-global. Middleware has been developed in projects that have lasted for 2-3 years, and several middleware stacks have been created in several projects. Next click. So, interoperability and easiness of access are issues that we are tackling to let researchers across the globe to access in an easy way infrastructures that the virtual research community they belong to wants to use and are authorized to use. Next slide, please. So very recently, Terena, which was introduced already by David, led a study on authorization, authentication, and accounting. The study was commissioned by the European Commission, and the study, which is published, you have on the right side, you have the link to the documents. The study had two goals. It has two objectives. One, to collect the user access requirements coming from different communities. In the sense that this is a very similar activity to what David and Bob Jones are leading in the FIM4R group. And the Terena study also provided a gap analysis of the existing infrastructures, and the ultimate goal was to provide recommendations for research networks, for interfederations, for a big project to implement federated access. Next slide. So the two things that emerged from the study, from the Terena study, on the left side, the fact that alpha researchers use more than one credentials, and the large majority would prefer to access all resources they are entitled to use using their institutional credentials. And second, evidence on the right side, a non-negligible number of users, about 20%, would like to use their social network accounts to access scientific information, not only open access documents, but also open data more recently. So we have to cope with federated access, but also with social credentials. Next slide, please. Click on it. So the study ended with some recommendation. Could you click once on this? Okay. There were many recommendations. I will try to address in my presentation the three which are highlighted in red. So the support, the authentication authorization support for mobile access, because we are becoming more and more mobile, and e-infrastructures must become mobile. Otherwise, people will just not use them. Provide guest IDP. David already talked about this, addressed this point. Okay, so in order to ease the access to e-infrastructures, in the last years, a new concept, a new technology is becoming available and is addressed by the general word of science gateways. Actually, the term was born in the US, but is now spreading in Europe and in many other regions of the world. So a science gateway is a community-developed set of tools, applications, and data that is integrated by a portal or a suite of applications, usually in a graphic user interface that is customized to meet the needs of specific community. So next slide. We at INFN and University of Catania, we are developing since a couple of years a framework to build science gateways. You can see the different blocks of the architecture of the framework, starting from the lower right part of the slide. Our assumption is that users from different organizations can have different roles and privileges in the portal. Inside the portal, if you look at the top left side of the slide, inside the portal you have applications which are community specific, and we are working on two key elements. On the science gateway itself, that's on the framework that is based on the Liferay portlet framework, and we are exploiting the Sega standard to interface different kind of middleware seamlessly in an independent way, so that you can have different adapters to run the applications at the same time on all the infrastructures, on all the middleware in a way which is transparent for the end users. And so far, we have managed to interface grid middleware, cloud middleware, and also middleware, local middleware, high performance computing centers with the local resource managers. Next slide, please. So in the framework that we are building, as David said, we would like to decouple authentication from authorization. For the authentication, we rely on identity federations, and we have different kind of identity providers. I will go through them in the next slides. For the authorization, we have user registries implemented with LDAP, where we store all the privileges, groups, and roles that different kind of users can have on a given science gateway. Next slide, please. So identity federations in the world, this picture is taken from REFEDS, the initiative led by Terena that David was referring about. So there are identity federations in many continents and many countries. So they gather more than 17 million people worldwide. There are more than 2,000 services and more than 1,500 institutions are enrolled, are registered, are members of identity federations. So supporting identity federations in science gateways could immediately widen enormously the potential base of users of these e-infrastructures. Next slide, please. There are also the Edugain Interfederation, which is a spin-off activity of JN3. Members of Edugain are spread in Europe, in the US, but they are also now coming from Asia, from Australia, and from Latin America, mostly thanks to the Alcira project that will be mentioned, I guess, at the end of today. And our gateways are also registered as service providers of Edugain. This means that we do not need to go by painful peer-to-peer agreements between the gateway and the identity providers, but we share the metadata, the sample metadata in a common metadata area, and all the IDPs which belong to the same area can exploit the service. Next slide, please. I would like to come back on the point of the guest IDPs and the guest federations. So since we knew that in many regions like Africa, like Latin America, and like many parts of Asia, there are no identity federations in place. We created a catch-all federation that could gather all the IDPs which do not belong to any federation and all people who do not belong to any IDP. Recently, this catch-all federation has been endorsed and co-managed by GAR, by the Italian UNRWA, and we jointly operate this guest federation between INFN and the GAR. So inside this catch-all federation, next click, please. We have two identity providers. One is a normal Shibboleth-based identity provider. It's a catch-all provider where we enroll all the people not belonging to any IDP. And next slide, please. Next click, sorry. We also have a special identity provider which bridges social network credential services. So through this IDP, we can let people get authorized to the service, get authenticated, not authorized by default, get authenticated using their social credentials. And this directly addresses one of the recommendations of the Terena AAA study. Next slide, please. So, in the context of GISELA, which was an European funded project that's aimed at interfacing European infrastructure with Latin American infrastructure and supporting several virtual research communities, we have implemented, using the framework that I just described, a Science Gateway for Latin American users. This is the address where you can get this. The Science Gateway is completely bilingual in Spanish and English. And next click. You can, to access, you have to register, and then when you are registered, you can access. Next slide. So we built a graphic discovery service. So people wanting to access a service of the Science Gateway which requires authentication, they will see this discovery service, and you can recognize in this discovery service that the Brazilian Federation CAFE, the Chilean Federation COFRE, and several federations in Europe are already available. And if you are not sure to which identity federation you belong to, users can click on the link at the bottom and get enrolled in our catch-all IDP. Click once. So selecting the catch-all federation, you have the identity providers which are members of this catch-all federation. You can recognize the EGI single sign-on service. We have official identity providers from enterprises. And at the top, we have the two IDPs, the two catch-all IDP, the one which is implemented using Shibboleth, and the other one which is implemented, which bridges the social credential provider. Click once. So if you choose the first one, you are redirected to the sign-in page of the catch-all identity provider, or if you click on the second one, you are redirected to a discovery server where you select the social credentials, the social network you want to use to get authenticated, and then you will be redirected to the sign-in page of your social network, and you can get authenticated to the service. Next slide, please. So this is the GISELA Science Gateway in action. Embedded in the Science Gateway, you have an application registry listing all the applications that are available. Next click. So for several applications, you have direct links to the pages of the Science Gateway where you can run if you are authorized, of course, you can directly run the applications. Next click. For example, you can cluster W is bioinformatic application for gene sequences. Then you can select the interface is very easy. You do not have any more complicated user interface, command line based. You have the web-based interfaces where users understanding the application put their input. And then next slide. You have, for example, as another example, Mr. Dias, which is very well-known application for phylogenetic analysis. Again, you have this application, you can submit, you can monitor the application running on the Latin American, European infrastructure, and at the end, you can get the output back on your laptop. Next slide. Yeah, this is the input parameters. Next slide. We are also interfacing the Gisela Science Gateway with the social networks, because we understand that many people also in the research community, they live inside their social network interface. So we have built this community page on Facebook that we are trying to promote, and we would like to promote further thanks to the Alcira and Red Clara. So this looks like a normal Facebook page, except from the GoToApp link. If you click on it, next slide, then you can embed the entire Science Gateway as a Facebook application. And click again. And then single sign-on is possible if you are authorized by the administrators of the Science Gateway to access it using your social network credentials. So you can, being inside your social network user interface environment, you can start the Science Gateway, the Gisela Science Gateway as an application, use it, and then delete it. Next slide. As I said at the beginning, in a world that is becoming mobile, we are also building mobile Science Gateways. And we are working on, as David said, on non-web federated identities, non-web applications. But instead of desktop application, non-web desktop applications, we are trying to address non-web mobile applications. So click once. This is a mobile Science Gateway that we are building for another project. So you have inside, we connected the mobile app to the identity federations. You have a similar discovery service where you can choose the identity federation you belong to. Then you choose your identity provider, click once. Then you are redirected to the sign-in page, and you can see that we keep the same look and feel. Also on the smartphone, on a tablet, you have the same sign-in page for the catch-all identity provider. Click once. And then you can browse. This is basically a browser of a digital repository of satellite images. Then you can inspect the repository and click once. You can get the image. You can get all the metadata from the image, and so you can download the image on your mobile device. Next slide. So now what we are trying to do, thanks to several projects we are involved in, we are trying to deploy Catania Science Gateways worldwide. So to deploy not only to give access to the Science Gateways which are installed in Catania, but also to deploy the entire system in other countries, in other organizations. And to do so, we developed training material for certification authorities, for identity providers and identity federations, and for the Science Gateways itself. This training material is reachable on the web and is at everyone's disposal to reuse in the context, in all the contexts that people want to reuse them. Next slide. Now some status report on what we are doing in several continents. So in Africa is really a greenfield that we started with certification authorities, providing virtual appliances This means virtual machines already pre-configured with certification authorities on board, and the 5 countries, Kenya, Malawi, Nigeria, Tanzania, and South Africa, quickly installed the certification authority servers, and now people are writing the policy documents to eventually join the UGRID PMA, as David mentioned in his presentation. Next slide. Concerning identity provider, this is another view of our catch-all federation. Click once. So you can see the South African catch-all identity provider, and you can see that there is a SANDREN, the South African NREN, and the SA Grid, the South African Grid, joined the effort to create a catch-all identity provider that has been connected to the Africa Grid Science Gateway, and people can use to access the Science Gateway, very much like Latin American users can access the Gisela Science Gateway. Other NRENs, Kenya and Tanzania, are next in the pipeline, so we'll follow soon, and we are finalizing the deployment of their first identity provider. Next slide. Arab countries. ASREN stands for Arab State Research and Education Network, is a regional research network trying to oversee the deployment of network links across the Arab countries. And they are also interested in providing federated services. So they managed to create their first IDP. Sorry, could you go back one slide? Sorry, could you go back one slide? Back one. Okay. So, go forward one. So I would like to describe the ASREN IDP. Okay, this one. Great, thank you. So ASREN deployed the first IDP, and this has been presented actually in these very days, in the last 2 days and today, in a workshop on identity federations for the Arab countries that was held in Amman, Jordan, co-organized by ASREN and Terena. Next slide. This is for Latin America. I know that, I already showed you that Latin America has an official identity federation in Brazil and another one in Chile. We are working with our colleagues at UNAM and CUDI in Mexico to create their Mexican Identity Federation, and they managed to create their first identity provider, and the identity provider is connected to the Gisela Science Gateway. So we hope to extend this. The CUDI and UNAM have already deployed several services providers besides the Gisela Science Gateways that have been connected to this federation, to this IDP, and they hope to extend this IDP. They hope to deploy IDPs in other Mexican universities in the next future. This, I think, could be an item of discussion when the Alcira presentation will be made at the end of this virtual day. Next slide, please. So, e-infrastructures can be very beneficial platforms for many users, provided that they're really easy to use and users are at the center of the e-infrastructures. Users do not need to cope with complex security infrastructure with job description languages, with scripts, with many cumbersome things, but they just need to concentrate on their scientific work and be able to access the infrastructures using the web as they access the Wi-Fi campus or the web magazine they are used to. Next, click. So we are trying to build a framework for science gateways that is changing the way grid infrastructures and infrastructures at large are used, because we want to widen as much as possible the user base across continents and organizations, especially non-IT experts and the so-called citizen scientists, people that are able to access the data and reproduce scientific analysis. Next, click. So we are working working on the adoption of standards, JSR 286 for the portlets, SAGA for the multi-middleware interoperability, SAM for identity federation, and this has been a concrete investment towards sustainability. Next click. I'm involved, or my team is involved in two projects, EI for Africa and Chainreds. The words are contain links to the project, so you can expect where the two projects are. And the Chainreds, so one of the partners of Chainreds is actually Red Clara. So you have a direct connection to Chainreds. So we are committed to support the deployment of infrastructure services in the various regions. And we have very good results from Africa and Latin America and Arabic countries, and we are willing to collaborate with Red Clara, with Alcira, and with other entrants to help the spread of these federated services to let user access science gateways and e-infrastructures. So that's it. Thank you very much. I look forward to receiving questions at the end of the day.
Thank you, Roberto. Por favor, tomen nota de las preguntas para realizarle a Roberto al final de la sesión. Le voy a dar ahora la bienvenida a Jim Basney de los Estados Unidos, del Centro Nacional de Aplicaciones de Supercomputación de la Universidad de Illinois, y él nos va a hablar hoy sobre InCommon and CI Logon, federaciones de identidad para darle soporte a la ciencia. Jim, you are on. Jim, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. I'm at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications at the University of Illinois. We're located at Urbana-Champaign, which is south of Chicago, here in Illinois, about a 2 hours drive by car south of Chicago. And I'll talk about our National Research and Education Federation in the United States called InCommon, and then CI Logon, which is one of the services that I operate that is participating in the InCommon Federation to support scientific collaborations. Next slide, please. So here you see the beginning of the list of participants in our InCommon Federation in the United States. We have over 300 higher education participants providing identities, running identity providers at universities across the United States. And as we already heard from David and Roberto, it's very valuable for research collaborations, for researchers to be able to use their identities that they already have on their campus to access research services. In addition to the higher education participants, InCommon also includes participants from government and nonprofit laboratories, research centers, and agencies, and you can see the start of the list there. So it's including Department of Energy laboratories such as Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and scientific collaborations like the LIGO Scientific Collaboration, which is the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory project. And InCommon also includes sponsored partners, which are mainly commercial partners that are providing services to the InCommon membership. Next slide, please. So already David mentioned in his presentation the challenge of providing a service that will work with many participants in a federation, many of the identity providers. And so joining the federation is the first step, but then it's also important to get attributes released and exchanged between the participants in the federation. And the InCommon Research and Scholarship category is a program in InCommon to support the scalable use of Federation for research and collaborative applications. And so the way that this program works is a service provider that is offering services to researchers applies to become a member of this program. Then the InCommon Federation reviews the application, and if the application is approved, the SAML metadata as part of the InCommon Federation adds a tag that indicates that this service provider is now a member of the research and scholarship category. And this indicates to identity providers in the Federation that they can interoperate automatically with that service provider, and that enables a very scalable connection between identity providers that want to support research and scholarship and the service providers that are offering the services. Next slide, please. On this next slide, you can see the current list of service providers that are participating in InCommon's research and scholarship program. There's 12 service providers, and you can see that CI Logon is at the top there. I'll be talking more about CI Logon in the remainder of my presentation, but other examples are the GENIE experimental portal. That's the Global Environment for Network Innovations. Also, the Indiana CTSI Hub is a Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute supporting clinical medical research. You can see 2 service providers for the LIGO research experiment, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, and other examples of wikis and portals that are supporting research collaboration through this service. And once the service providers join, then they can interoperate very easily with the identity providers that are participating. And see, so here you can see the count of 55 identity providers currently participating in this program, and we continue to see growth in participation in the program so that collaboration can be supported across many universities in the United States. Next slide, please. So the CI Logon service is a service that we operate here at the University of Illinois that is included in the InCommon Federation, and you can access it at cilogon.org. This service provides certificates for access to research services like Globus Online and Open Science Grid and others. And we support InCommon authentication to the service, and so you can see there's a list of identity providers, including the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, which is the identity provider that I would use to log into CI Logon. But we also support OpenID authentication, so users can use Google authentication to access the service if they are not members of a campus that is currently participating in InCommon. There is much more detail about our CI Logon service in our FAQ, and there's news about activities in the project here at that news link, and then more information about the certification authority that issues the certificates at CI Logon is provided at ca.cilogon.org. So what you see on that slide is the front page for the CI Logon service, where I can select an identity provider. I could select Google or my university identity provider. So if I select the University of Illinois and click the Logon button, then we'll see what's on the next slide. So next slide, please. So here we see the federated login page for the University of Illinois, where I would enter my username and password to authenticate. And so the goal here is that I'm using the credentials at my home university to access the CI Logon research service. CI Logon is not aware of my password, and so we keep the security local to the campus. Only the campus is seeing the password and validating the password. And then what it's doing is issuing a SAML assertion back to the CI Logon service that includes my identity information. So if I enter my username and password here and click the login button, then it will bring me back to the CI Logon service. Next slide, please. Thanks. And this shows a page that's presented at the CI Logon service after I authenticate. And so now it knows my identity. It knows that I'm James Vasmy from the University of Illinois. And so now I can enter a password to protect my new certificate, click the Get New Certificate button, and download a certificate that now I can use with Open Science Grid or Globus Online or other research services that are issued by the CI, 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 Next slide, please. And so CI Logon participates in the International Grid Trust Federation that you've already heard about from David earlier today. And what this enables is for the certificates issued by CI Logon and certification authorities like it to be used internationally in research infrastructures. And so if the identity that you authenticate with to CI Logon has sufficient assurance, an assurance level 2 identity, then CI Logon is able to issue a certificate that can be used in the Open Science Grid or European Grid Initiative or other participants in the International Grid Trust Federation around the world. And so since we're a certification authority in the United States, we participate in the International Grid Trust Federation through the TAG PMA, which is the America's Grid PMA. Next slide, please. So next, I'd like to show how to use CI Logon with the Globus Online service, which is a very nice service for researchers to use to transfer data reliably and securely between sites. And so you can see here on the sign-in page for Globus Online, you have many options for authenticating to the service, and one of them is CI Logon. So if we choose the CI Logon option, then we'll come to the next slide. And so next we need to click the proceed button. So next slide, please. So the way that Globus Online connects with CI Logon is through the OAuth protocol. And so by clicking that next button, the user's browser is redirected to the CI Logon site. And we'll see that on the next slide, please. So here is a new version of the CI Logon site. You can see that it's customized for Globus Online, and it's explaining that Globus Online would like you to authenticate. And we have the same choices of identity providers. So again, I'll choose the University of Illinois and click Log On. Next slide, please. And what clicking that button does is initiate a SAML transaction using the SAML protocol to authenticate with the University of Illinois to CI Logon. Next slide, please. And you see the same website at the University of Illinois where I enter my username and password and click log on to continue. Next slide, please. And the result is now that I've authenticated at the University of Illinois, that issues a SAML assertion to CI Logon, and then CI Logon can continue the OAuth transaction with Globus Online, and finally Globus Online can obtain a certificate from CI Logon that authenticates me to the Globus Online service and that I can use for data transfers using the Grid FTP protocol. Next slide, please. And so now you see I've arrived at the Globus Online site, and it knows my identity. It knows that I'm user Jay Basney, and I can initiate file transfers and use other services at Globus Online. Next slide, please. The Globus Online is just one example of cyber infrastructure that we're working with in the CI Logon project. Other examples are shown on this slide, including LIGO and Open Science Grid, Data One, the Cardiovascular Research Grid, and the Ocean Observatories Initiative. In each case, we are customizing the CI Logon service to provide the look and feel and user interface and user experience that provides a seamless experience for the user in using federated authentication with their research application. Next slide, please. I would like to refer you to 3 very interesting resources that are available online to provide more information about using federated identity with research cyber infrastructure. The first is a roadmap for using cyber infrastructure with the InCommon Federation. And this was produced, it discusses a lot of the same issues that already we heard about from David and Roberto about attribute release and using federated identity outside the web browser. And so it gives some particularly resources specific to the United States, but also discusses how CI Logon can be used with federated identities. The second reference is an analysis of benefits and risks to a scientific project, in this case LIGO, when participating in identity federations. And so this is an example where a scientific collaboration was in operation and they wanted to use identity federation, but the security officers and the other participants in the collaboration wanted to have a good understanding of new risks that might be involved if they're using federated identity. So this reference provides some useful details on the risks associated with federated identity, but also the benefits that that explain why we want to use federated identity. And the third is a reference on incident response for security incidents in a federated identity context. And so as we're using federated identities, we need good procedures and policies for handling security incidents when they may occur. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. There's more information about InCommon at incommon.org and more about CILogon at CILogon.org. And I'm happy to answer questions by email. And also I look forward to our discussion period later in the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Please, o todas sus preguntas al final, no olviden de tomar notas de las preguntas para Jim. Ahora los voy a dejar con Derek Simmel de la Federación Exceed y la infraestructura de autenticación que usa esta federación. Derek, you are on.
Thanks. Can you get my slides up, or? While we're waiting for our slides, my name is Derek Simmel. I work at the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center. This is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This is in western Pennsylvania, so not close to New York, more close to Ohio. And PSC is one of several sites in the United States Exceed project, which links together many of the top high-performance computing centers in the United States to provide cyber infrastructure for the national, that is the United States computational science community. We do also collaborate with other federations and projects throughout the world, and but this is sort of the largest one that is sponsored by the National Science Foundation. As an aside, I am also the current chair of the TAG PMA, that's the America's Grid Policy Management Authority. That's the America's arm of the International Grid Trust Federation that has been mentioned earlier. I welcome anybody who would like to learn more about the Trust Federation to join us on our monthly calls, and I can provide information, or Ale can provide that information as well. She is our secretary of the TAG PMA, so we're well represented here. If you'll go ahead to the next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Exceed. So instead of talking about so much about the details of the infrastructure of federations, I'm going to take an approach that talks a little bit about how this large Exceed project is starting to use the federated identity capabilities. And I'm very fortunate that Jim Basney was giving his presentation just before me, because he gave you a lot more detail than I could go into about how InCommon and CILogon work, which works perfectly for my presentation, and I'll try to keep it short. I'll basically be talking about Exceed, the project, what our objectives in terms of authentication for our users are, the services that comprise authentication within the project, and how we are now interfacing with external services that are not part of the project but that our users are using. And again, we'll touch on Globus Online as an example. It happens to be a good example of one that we don't control, but that our users are it's very popular with our users, and we have worked with Globus Online to allow our identity and authentication to work securely. And then I'll have a few comments about some future directions that we are taking in Exceed. Next slide, please. So Exceed is an acronym for Extreme Science and Engineering Discovery Environment, which is a sort of a, I don't know, a special title we gave to the project when we applied to the National Science Foundation for funding, and is a large e-science cyber infrastructure project, again funded by the United States National Science Foundation. It includes high-performance computing resources and services provided by universities and centers including Georgia Tech University, Indiana University, the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Colorado, the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, of course, Jim Basney's organization, the National Institute for Computational Sciences in Tennessee, the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center, my site, Purdue University, the San Diego Supercomputing Center, and the Texas Advanced Computing Center, among others. Other partners providing software and other management and staff include the University of Chicago and the University of Virginia, and we also have some collaborators helping us with Unicore grid software at the Jülich Supercomputing Center in Germany. Next slide, please. The XSEED does have a private high bandwidth network between the major sites involved in the project, and this is sort of just a functional diagram of it. It's obviously not geographically correct, but you get a sense of how it's all hooked together. We basically have 10 gigabits, excuse me, 10 gigabits of bandwidth between each of the sites through these connections, primarily through switches in Chicago and Denver. And the RE networks box you see at the right indicates links to research and education networks outside of the XSEED network itself. Next slide, please. So our authentication objectives within the XSEED project itself, we have hundreds of users, probably well over 1,000 users at any given time with current projects within XSEED, and they're using HPC resources throughout the area. It's not a grid where you generally submit a job and then some broker finds a system to run it on. By and large, when you run something in XSEED, you have submitted a proposal to execute an application or to create a science gateway that works with specific resources in the XSEED area. So perhaps you need a machine with a lot of large memory as opposed to, or a machine that's good for MPI applications, and you will be directed to using that specific resource that is best for your application. So, but our authentication objectives, nobody wants to be able to have to authenticate to different sites with different usernames, different passwords, and so on and so forth. And in the history of XSEED, which before XSEED was called XSEED, we had a similar project called TeraGrid that had many of the same participants in it. And so a lot of what we use today was inherited from the TeraGrid days, when, as a way of consolidating how we were going to get all these different users to be able to authenticate to all the sites, we started to find some technological ways of making our authentication somewhat agnostic. That means that it wasn't tied to any specific site, but that you could use it everywhere. So our objectives were reducing the burden on users who wanted to connect to multiple sites within XSEED, and ideally to enable something called single sign-on, which I'm sure we're familiar with now after all these presentations, where users can essentially use one credential to get into all the sites regardless of where it is. Next slide, please. So the authentication services within XSEED are basically a Kerberos realm. Again, it goes back to the TeraGrid days. We didn't change the name of the realm because doing so would have complicated existing users' authentication. So we just left it be. And in addition to that, we use X509 certificate authorities, and we have our most popular CA, I would say, is the XSEED MyProxy CA, operated by the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. And we accept certificates from IGTF accredited CAs. That means CAs that have undergone an examination within the community, within the IGTF community, to validate that they are operating to the standards of a specific profile. You can get more information about that at the IGTF.net website. In addition, we are now starting to use OAuth, which Jim Basney mentioned, for authenticating using local credentials or our XSEDE credentials to external services. Next slide, please. So before I go there, I just sort of want to explain a little bit about how users get onto XSEDE. Principal investigators, these are researchers at US institutions, perhaps in collaboration with foreign researchers as well, apply for grants of processor time and storage for their applications or science gateways through an allocations process. And these are peer reviewed by scientists in their field, and based on the merit of these proposals, they may be awarded a certain number of CPU hours and storage on specific resources within the XSEDE consortium. So once the PIs are awarded their time and resources, they tell us who the users are that are permitted to essentially charge time and storage against their allocation, and the new users are added to a central XSEDE user database. And each new user gets a unique XSEDE username. This is essentially a Kerberos principle, as well as a unique X509 certificate subject that is used for issuing certificates from the XSEDE MyProxy CA. Next slide, please. So when you go to the XSEDE user portal login, you are essentially entering your username and password. This is a Kerberos principle and password. And when you do this, one of the things that the portal does is it automatically goes out to, if you are an allocated user, that is. If you're just a guest, it doesn't do this. But if you are an allocated user, it automatically goes and retrieves for you an X509 credential from the XSEDE MyProxy certificate authority. Next slide, please. So again, once you have this credential from the portal, you can use services within the portal that use GSI, just like the Java GSI SSH application and other things that use the X.509 authentication to get to, without having to know a local username and password at that remote resource. So, and by the same token, users need username and password to obtain credentials and then use grid services like GSI OpenSSH, Grid FTP, that's the global URL copy client, and also now Unicore services using credentials that they obtain from the XSEDE CA. Next slide, please. So once I've logged in, I can see things like my usage, and there are various tabs that get you to additional things. Next slide, please. This is a page that shows you what resources, these are computational resources, are available, how busy they are. You can examine what's going on in them. And as you imagine, for a central portal for a large project like this, each user's view is perhaps a little bit different based on their allocation and what they can do. But in general, this is the primary central information center for the XSEDE project. Next slide, please. This is a quick little example to show you that even at a login prompt on a console, you can use MyProxy client to obtain a credential. Again, the credential happens to come from NCSA, and then even though the credential comes from NCSA, I can log in to our supercomputer here at the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center, and I didn't need to know my local username and password at PSC to do that. Next slide. So this is a very long list, and I don't expect you to read it, but if you get the slides later, you'll get a sense of it. We have, I think it's about 28 or so certificate authorities that we currently accept certificates from within Exceed. Several of these are different parts of a hierarchy of the same certificate authority, so it's not really this many different certificate authorities as it is the necessary CA certificates that we keep in our, well, to use a Globus term, our ETSI Grid Security certificates directory, which is sort of the center where we keep the accepted CAs for authentication to grid services, including GSI OpenSSH, Globus tool.
Please enter your conference ID. Welcome to Unified Conferencing.
Do that, all the authentication things happen, and the files in your remote Grid FTP server become visible. Now, looking then at a different way of going, this is what we saw just now was authentication where OAuth was used to go out to the Exceed user portal and allow you to use your Exceed credentials to authenticate to an Exceed endpoint. So this is a Grid FTP server at a site within Exceed. So what we'll do next, if you'll go to the next slide, please, is we'll connect to a server using CI logon instead. Next slide, please. And just like we saw before, you get redirected to the CI logon service. In my case, I don't have a local username and password from the University of Illinois. I'm at Carnegie Mellon University, so I pick Carnegie Mellon. Next slide, please. And that takes me to the Carnegie Mellon University local username and password entry. Next slide, please. And by the same mechanism, but through a different identity provider and a different route, I can access the same server. As it happens, I was going to the same server on a different port, but you get the idea. So we have ways now of allowing users to authenticate to remote servers that are external to Exceed, to servers within Exceed, and use a service that it's outside of Exceed to make that all happen, all without divulging the private usernames and password authentication information to the external service. Next slide, please. So again, external services like Globus Online are very valuable, but we have to manage the way they obtain users' credentials for authenticating to the things that they touch. So OAuth service helps us do that with the XSEED user portal for XSEED credentials, and CI Logon does this on a broader context for universities and in-common members that are part of, that are available through the CI Logon service. Next slide, please. So in summary, XSEED within itself uses a combination of Kerberos and certificate-based authentication, in addition to now OAuth to enable authentication in a variety of ways that allow our users and external users to access our systems. Next slide, please. In future, some of the things that we're trying to do within XSEED to make our lives a lot easier to manage include reducing the number of certificate authorities operated by XSEED service providers. Several years ago, in the TerraGrid days, when we were considering getting certificates from commercial sources or from other CAs, it was often cheaper, quite frankly, to set up your own CA and issue certificates that you needed. This is no longer the case, and in fact, the cost of operating a certificate authority within your organization can often be significant enough that it's now economically viable to go out to an external service to do this, and there's a great deal of interest in actually doing that. What we'd rather do instead of operating CAs is perhaps have identity providers that we can trust, and they then help us to get the authentication closer to where our users are, rather than having them have a single XSEED login per se. So the other thing that is a problem that continuously plagues us in terms of security is that our most common issue is that we are using usernames and passwords are, especially reusable ones, obviously, are a security risk, and with the increasing speed at which passwords can be broken, and also the reduction in cost by one-time password technologies and services now, because it's not just a hardware token anymore, but there are web services that do this for you. We are investigating one-time password technologies as a replacement for reusable passwords. And then, of course, going in the direction, as we've just seen with InCommon and other identity federations, extending our trust to users' local identity providers so that they can authenticate locally and receive credentials that they can use with our XSEED resources. Next slide, please. Finally, I have a few links for additional information, just things that I mentioned, XSEED itself, that's a website for XSEED, information about Kerberos if you're interested, the MyProxy Credential Management Service, which was developed at NCSA and that we have come to rely on, the International Grid Trust Federation, again, that includes TAG PMA, the European Grid Policy Management Authority, and also the Asia Pacific Grid Policy Management Authority, and finally some information from the OAuth community site if you're interested in OAuth. Next slide. Do I have another slide?
Thank you very much, Derek.
I think I'm done.
Yes.
Sorry if I ran long.
Now we are going to have Leandro Guimares from the NREN in Brasil. Leandro es el próximo en hablar. Por favor, las preguntas a Derek, escríbanlas para realizarlas al final. Leandro, you have the presentation right now.
Ok, yo he hecho mi presentación en español, yo creo que no hay problema, ¿no? Alejandra?
No, no hay problema.
Ok, perfecto. Yo voy a compartir mi tiempo con Alejandro de Reúna. Yo voy a hablar un poco de Proyecto Auxília. Pode cambiar para o próximo slide, por favor? Esos son los miembros del proyecto. El proyecto es coordinado por Rede Clara. Tenemos miembros de Dante, de GAR, que es la Rede Académica de Italia, RNP, Renata, Terena y Rede Iris. Próximo. La duración del proyecto es de 24 meses, el presupuesto es de 1.360.000 y la contribución de Comisión Europea es de 1 millón de euros. Próximo. La propuesta del proyecto es crear una serie de herramientas y servicios de colaboración para facilitar o trabalho de equipe de investigação de Europa e América Latina e fomentar a colaboração em projetos de investigação conjuntos. Aqui no próximo. Nós temos 7 paquetes de trabalho que são coordenados por Rede Clara, RNP e Renata. São dois paquetes de trabalhos que vamos trabalhar especificamente para a Federação de Identidade. Esse paquete de trabalho 2, que é criar algumas federações e fazer a integração com o EduGain. E paquete de trabalho 4, que é promover o despliegue de drone na América Latina. Próximo. Ahorita nosotros tenemos estos países ya con la firma de MOU entre la red académica y UCIRA. La red académica de Perú está, yo creo que haciendo los trámites para hacer la firma, yo creo que esta semana. Entonces, todos esos países ya están compromisados al proyecto. Próximo. Hablando um pouco de federação de identidade, acá em América Latina nós temos 2 federações em produção, que é Café e Cofre. Cofre, Alejandro vai falar um pouco depois. Próximo. O objetivo de paquete 2 é ter 3 federações a EduGain. Chile será a primeira federação a hacer a conexão com o EduGain. Brasil já está. E temos mais 2 federações que estamos começando o trabalho. Temos Argentina, Peru, Colômbia e México. Pero esta não está cerrado para novas redes acadêmicas. Quem estiver nesse evento pode enviar um correio para o projeto UCIRA que podemos começar o trâmite para añadir também a este projeto. Ok, próximo. Para o desenvolvimento de uma federação e fazer a interconexão com o EduGain, estes são os principais hitos para fazer o projeto listo. Então, a parte de piloto tem o nome, webpage e metadados listos. Para a produção, hacer a política de los provedores de identidades e provedores de serviços. Para ser um candidato a añadir a EduGain, os metadados de declaração de práticas de registro. E para añadir a EduGain, a declaração firmada e os metadados validados por la equipe de EduGain. Próximo. Podemos cambiar também. Hoje nós temos a estrutura de EduGain por lo mundo. Temos mais fortemente em Europa, pero acá em América Latina, Brasil já está como membro e Chile já está começando o projeto, o processo para añadirlo. Próximo. Então, na América Latina, essas são as 3 federações emergentes. Já estamos começamos o trabalho para fazer a adesão a EduGain. dentro del proyecto EUSIRA. Entonces tenemos Argentina, México y Perú. Chile ya está con federación lista, pero los trámites ya están siendo hechos. Próximo. Otro servicio para federación es Eduron. Próximo. Que estamos hablando de paquete de trabajo 4. Entonces, en el paquete de trabajo 4 tenemos pelo menos duas novas redes acadêmicas, idealmente 4, dentro de Eduron Global, e hasta o final do projeto, pelo menos 7 redes acadêmicas com a firma de acordo para implementar Eduron. Próximo. Esses são o dibujo de Eduron Global hoje, próximo, que está mais detalhado para a América Latina. Na América Latina temos em produção Brasil, Peru e Chile. Peru está agora fazendo a operação da Confederação da América Latina de Eduron. Temos 9 NRENs em piloto, que é Argentina, Colômbia, Costa Rica, Equador, El Salvador, México, Nicarágua, Uruguai e Venezuela. Próximo. Em resumo, nós temos esta situação em projeto EUSIRA. Temos 7 redes acadêmicas, sendo que Brasil já está tudo listo, mas as outras 6 estamos fazendo o trabalho para ou añadir a EduGain, ou criar uma federação e añadir a Eduron Global. Próximo. Os próximos passos do projeto EUSIRA hará uma capacitação dentro de TICAL 2013, que este ano será em Cartagena de Índia, em Colômbia. Os dias de TICAL será 8 e 9 de julho. Há uma reunião de Claratec dia 10 e há esta capacitação 11 e 12 de julho. Mais informação está nesta aplicação. Dentro do projeto também vamos continuar o desenvolvimento de Federação de Identidade em Peru e México, que estão em fase de piloto ou já está em desenvolvimento, e Eduron em Argentina, Colômbia, Costa Rica e México. Próximo. As perguntas vamos deixar para o final. Agora com Alejandro de Reúna para falar sobre cofre.
Perfecto. Lo tenemos en línea. Reúna. Leandro, ¿cuál es su nombre?
¿Perdón?
¿Quién va a hablar en Reúna?
Alejandro, ya está.
Alejandro, ¿estás en línea?
No sé si me escuchan.
Sí,
sí.
Ya, perfecto. Hola, soy Alejandro Lara, de Reúna, ingeniero de servicio. Bueno, la presentación está en inglés, pero yo la voy a dar en español, ¿ya? Así que, bueno, aquellos que son de habla inglesa van a poder seguir la presentación sin ningún problema. Bien, por favor, si pueden continuar. Si puede pasar a la siguiente slide. Bueno, de partida, ¿cuál fue nuestra motivación? Nosotros partimos tomando el tema del acceso a las editoriales electrónicas, al contenido de las editoriales electrónicas, y poder ofrecer una forma alternativa de poder acceder a este contenido, ¿ya? Por ahora, ¿cómo se hace el acceso al contenido, por lo menos acá en Chile? Es mediante acceso vía rangos de IP, Entonces, la universidad informa qué rango de IP es el válido para poder acceder a las editoriales, y el acceso se hace solamente en la institución. O sea, yo debo ir a la institución y conectarme a la red para poder acceder al contenido, ¿ya? Hay otros tipos de acceso, pero en definitiva caen dentro de lo mismo. Yo debo llegar a mi institución para poder acceder al contenido. Y bueno, ¿quiénes fueron las instituciones involucradas en un comienzo en el desarrollo de Cofre? Bueno, fueron 4. Por un lado, Reuna, además de CONICIT, que es la agencia encargada acá en Chile de Ciencia, Innovación y Tecnología; Cincel, que es una especie de consorcio que está encargado de lo que es contratación de material electrónico o de publicaciones electrónicas; y la Universidad del Biobío, quien fue el primero en trabajar en este tema, y dado que se encontró con la necesidad de poder armar una federación, nos requirió a nosotros el poder construirla. Siguiente, por favor. Bueno, ¿cómo estamos trabajando hasta este momento? Nuestro objetivo principal en lo que respecta a instituciones proveedoras de identidad, estamos enfocados a que todas las instituciones de investigación y educación a nivel nacional acá en Chile puedan participar como proveedoras de identidad, ¿ya? Y como proveedores de servicio, todos aquellos prestadores de servicios que, valga la redundancia, ya tengan un acuerdo de servicio con alguna institución proveedora de identidad en Cofre. O sea, si es que hay una editorial o si hay algún otro prestador de servicio que ya esté funcionando con esquema federado, es, digamos, candidato a poder participar de la federación como proveedor de servicio. Las tecnologías que estamos usando actualmente son SAML 2.0 y aplicaciones compatibles con este estándar, que por ejemplo está Shibboleth y SimpleSAML PHP, que son herramientas que ya tienen implementado este esquema. Siguiente, por favor. Bueno, al momento en qué estado estamos es el siguiente. Tenemos 3 proveedores de identidad, ¿ya? Entre ellos el de esta universidad que les hacía mención, la Universidad del Biobío, y 8 proveedores de servicio, dentro de los cuales la gran mayoría son editoriales, pero también tenemos proveedores de servicio que escapan un poco a ese ámbito, que es, por ejemplo, el de Gisela, como hacía mención nuestro amigo de Catania, y también tenemos el proveedor de servicios que es de Terena, ¿ya? También, y como también lo comentó Leandro, hemos sido parte de actividades de difusión. Bueno, a nivel nacional estamos planificando una jornada de capacitación en conjunto con CONICIT y Cincel, y a nivel de Latinoamérica ya hemos participado de actividades en conjunto con RNP y Red Clara, ¿ya? También hemos sido reconocidos como la Federación Chilena por RIFETS, y también hemos firmado el acuerdo de EduGain para participar, ¿ya? Siguiente, por favor. Bueno, aquí es lo que estamos apuntando y cuál es nuestra visión de futuro, es poder mantener digamos, poder crecer y poder también diversificar la cantidad de servicios que hay en la federación. Por una parte, estamos apuntando a aumentar el número de proveedores de identidad, ¿ya? De hecho, la jornada de capacitación a la que hacía mención anteriormente está enfocada a esto, a poder difundir este esquema de acceso entre las instituciones a nivel nacional acá en Chile. Poder agregar y poder tener disponible una mayor cantidad de publicadores electrónicos, ¿ya? En orden de poder tener una oferta mucho más atractiva para nuestros participantes como proveedores de identidad. poder agregar a otros tipos de servicios. Por ejemplo, tener nuestros propios servicios de Reuna federados, y también poder ofrecer otro tipo de servicios como servicios en la nube y servicios adicionales que vayamos viendo que son de interés para nuestra comunidad. Y seguir involucrado en las iniciativas internacionales, tales como hacía mención REFEDS, como EduGain también, y poder también agregar a otras, tal como hicieron mención a FIM for Research, también nos interesa poder participar de ello. Siguiente, por favor. Bueno, he aquí la información acerca de nosotros. Pueden visitarnos, nuestro sitio está en español y en inglés, y cualquier duda la pueden plantear al correo que aparece a continuación. Eso es todo. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Alejandro. Now we are going to proceed with the questions from the audience. First, we have a question for David Kelsey from the Universidad UNEYES in Barinas, Venezuela. They want to know how to participate in REFEDS and to start a federation. I can't hear you, David. Let's check here. We're checking the audio with David. David, try again.
So can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So I'm not necessarily the best person to speak on behalf of REFEDS. I mean, the best way to participate is to send an email to the Terena people. So that's to Licia Florio or to Nicole Harris through the REFEDS page to say we want to be part of this this enterprise. I'm sure REFEDS. I don't represent REFEDS, but I'm sure REFEDS would welcome new participants to join. Right? So go to the webpage refeds.org, find the information, send an email saying we want to join in. It's an open activity. They would welcome you, I'm sure. Does that answer the question?
I will tell you shortly when I speak with the people from UNEYES.
Okay.
And let you know. Now we have a couple of questions from Cudi in Mexico. Please, Cudi.
Okay, the question is this. What is the politics that you are promoting for the different kinds of IDPs in one country, and how they can relate with the NREN? Part of the question was answered during the interventions before, but I think it is good to hear about more comments.
Sorry, Jesus. I think we hear you too low. Can you repeat your question?
Okay. The question is, what are the politics in Terena for the development of more IDPs in one country, and how they are related with the NREN in the country? That's all.
So I'm not sure, is that a question?
I think maybe Roberto can answer that. Roberto, are you there? I cannot see Roberto. I think that the main idea from Jesus was how to incorporate more IDPs in Terena and in federations in general through NRENs. Is that the way you do it in Europe, David?
Well, I don't know. I can only comment on behalf of the United Kingdom. I mean, here, the federation is indeed run by the NREN, by Janet UK, and their colleagues through the UK Access Federation, and the universities get connected in via that community. I assume that's going to be similar in many of the European countries. But that's maybe, again, a question that could be addressed to RefEds or through the El Sierra project that we heard about, right? I mean, that's supposed to be a mechanism for connecting the European federations into Latin America. So I'm not qualified really to give better answers than that. Maybe Jim can talk about the USA.
Jim, what's the experience in the USA with that?
Now Jim has gone.
Jim, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Could you restate the question, please?
How are the relationship between IDPs and the RENs? Is there a policy in the United States on how the REN and IDPs work and make more IDPs? How does that work in the US?
So in the US, the InCommon Federation is operated by Internet2, which is our national research and education network provider. And it's actually a separate process to join the federation compared to joining the NREN, but at least there are financial benefits to joining both at the same time, and some of the services offered by the NREN are accessed through federated authentication. So there's good synergy. So in the United States, there's a lot of close collaboration between the NREN and the federation activity.
Jesús, ¿eso responde tus preguntas?
No sé si me escuchas, Alejandro.
Sí, ahora sí.
Alejandro, sí, Alejandro de Reúna.
De Mérida, Venezuela.
Sí, mira, me gustaría complementar un poco la respuesta, dado que igual tenemos experiencia al respecto de la pregunta que hace Jesús en México. Lo que se estila es que la institución que va a ser proveedor de identidad se adscriba a la federación, ¿ya? Que generalmente, y como lo han comentado todos los colegas acá, es digamos, administrada por la red académica del país, y luego si la federación está adscrita a instancias como por ejemplo EduGain, es la federación en definitiva quien digamos establece las relaciones con las digamos instancias internacionales, no el IDP. No sé si eso complementa un poco más la respuesta.
Jesús from CUDI, is your question answered? Okay, thank you, Jesús. Let me check who's next. Now we have Gustavo Garcia from Renata in Colombia.
Hi. My question, I'm from Red Clara, but my question is about services available on the federations. Accessing this, there is some space where providers or can talk to identity or federations in different countries and to carry out bilateral peerings or things like that. Because I heard that in some situations you need to do some bilateral agreements to access some of the services and perhaps other not. Is there some space where you do that? Some forum, some space?
Well, I can comment a little bit about that. In the sense of IGTF and its accreditation of certificate authorities, because it is an international group, it allows accredited certificate authorities in different countries to essentially be accepted abroad without the foreign countries having to validate each other's certificate authorities and their operations. They are accredited to common standards that are agreed upon internationally, and this facilitates the ability for people obtaining a local certificate to authenticate to foreign resources. Is that sort of what you're looking at?
Yes, but I would also like to know, for instance, if some institution in Latin America wants to access, for instance, a specific database in Europe, in the United States, belonging to some federation, the institution will require to do some agreement with the service providing institution, or there's some way through the federation to access to the service freely.
Speaking within XSEED, it's common for people who want access from remote countries to collaborate with at least one collaborator that they know within the United States to then put a proposal together for access to the resources. Because our resources happen to be funded by the National Science Foundation, which is that's public United States tax dollars, there is a requirement that all projects on XSEED have at least a U.S. member principal investigator, submitting a proposal for access. But collaborations are very common. We often have international collaborations where there is a representative from the United States and then several collaborators in a foreign country who then who get awarded some allocation for storage or application or access to a science gateway, and then access our resources that way.
Perfect. Thank you.
So maybe I could also comment on that question. I think this is where, again, we're trying to separate out the authentication part from the authorization. For any given service, there may well be requirements to have agreements as to who can access the service. But what we don't want to do is at the same time have to then negotiate with every single IDP as well to have an agreement for the authentication part. So I think it would be very beneficial if we can actually come up with common codes of practice in the same way that IGTF does, and with this EduGain new code of conduct that enables service providers and IDPs to act together, and then you leave the community to manage the authorization to the service and any agreements that need to be entered into on the basis of who can access the service and under what restrictions, etc., etc. I mean, unless it's something which is world readable, there will always be some sort of agreement to access a service, but we don't want to end up having to have agreements with every single identity provider in the world.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you. Excellent.
And so I'd just like to add that the agreements with the federation and then the agreements between the federations with Edugain can be very helpful even when there's the need for an agreement between service providers and the users, or service providers and the identity providers, because they can provide a common framework through code of practice and SAML standards and other commonalities that can make it much more easy to establish the direct bilateral agreements.
Understood. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, David, and thank you, Derek.
Now we have a question for the ELCIRA team in Brazil. The question is, what are the main challenges you see to develop federations and EduRoam projects in Latin America?
As you all said, Jim, doing this federating is not easy. The technical issue is not that challenging anymore. I think the policy, the understanding, all the job that are involved in creating this federation, and why do I have to create this federation? So as soon as the NRENs and the institutions understand all these challenges, I think the work is easier. But until we get there, that's the challenge.
Well, the same said David at the beginning of the video conference, that federations were more policies than technical stuff. So here in Latin America, we expect the same issues. I think that's all for today. Thank you very, very much to all our panelists. It was really nice to have you here. And anything you want to say to close the event, you are welcome. And if you want to get the material, it's all in the URL from the event, the virtual days in Red Clara. You are more than welcome to download them afterwards. Thank you very much to all, and we are welcome for anything else you want to say.
Thank you for the opportunity to let us come in.